Would you mind giving that bird's eye view of what the water situation currently is in Arizona?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think it's important to set the context. We are experiencing climate change in Arizona. Uh, a lot of times people will hear, well, this is going to happen in the future. Well, it's happening. And one of the impacts of climate change is uh, hotter, drier, more intense droughts, and then when we do get rain, more of it coming all at once, and so that really affects everything. And so I think it's important to look at that. Uh, in Arizona, the laws do not really adequately protect our water. You'll hear, oh, well, we have this Groundwater Management Act, and it was, a really important law. And of course it was, but it was passed in 1980, and it has not really been um, updated or expanded the way that it needed to be. But anyway, so the the laws and the regulation of water are pretty lax in Arizona, um, to say the least. We have a Colorado River that was over allocated from the very beginning. There are these agreements that divvy up the water in the Colorado, and from day one, the assumption was there was more water than there really was. And again, with climate change and the reduced flows in the Colorado, we're seeing a lot less water come through the river. And what that means for Arizona is that we can take less water out of the Colorado. And the reason for that is because it was part of this agreement to get the Central Arizona project, which I think maybe most people know that that's a big canal that brings water into, pumps it uphill, brings it into Phoenix, and all the way on down to Tucson. And so we have to take less water when Lake Mead falls to a certain level. The first shortages go to agricultural interests because they have been getting cheap water, lower priority cheap water. Um, so anyway, so we have that situation. Just earlier this year, the drought contingency plan was adopted by the Arizona legislature, and then the lower basin states, California, Nevada, and Arizona. And that's an agreement on how we will take the first level of shortages. And I know some of it may sound confusing, so feel free to ask a
No, no.
question if I go too far down the rabbit hole. But anyway, that agreement in the legislature, what they did to address those shortages basically was to provide for more groundwater pumping. So it's not like we're going to use less water or much less water. It's like, well, let's go ahead and give money to Pinal County agricultural interests, who, by the way, many of whom are mostly interested in developing the land at some point. Let's give them money so they can pump more groundwater. And so that was a big part of the drought contingency plan. There's some other things, that water agreements with the Gila River Indian community and the Colorado River Indian tribes. The Colorado River Indian tribes agreed to fallow some of their farmlands on along the Colorado, and leave more water in Lake Mead, and there was a cash agreement for that. And so it's really like you'll hear the governor and all these people talk about this great drought contingency plan, but there are so many issues with it. that I think are flawed, and it's not a sustainable plan. First of all, it only takes us out to 2026. That's not very far out. Second of all, it really isn't, a plan to create a sustainable future. It's a plan to pay for more groundwater pumping over here and continue to, feed development over here. And there was no restructuring of the system. And then there's nothing in it that does anything to sustain our rivers and streams, which is something that we brought up. We've talked about the Colorado River. It's overallocated, flows are reduced. The river is heavily plumbed, right? We've got dams and diversions, and it really is. I will say a very hard-working river. We have put it to the test. And then our in-state rivers, the San Pedro River, which flows north from Sonora into Arizona, is a critical river. It is an important flyway for migratory birds. It's a key tourist area. It's, a very biologically rich area. It is very much threatened by groundwater pumping as well, and it dries up in places in the driest part of the year, which is usually in June. And so we've got that river that's threatened, and all that it supports is threatened. And there are new developments that are proposed to go in there. Some people may have heard of the villages at Vigneto. That's one. The Tribute development is an earlier proposal. That one, Tribute, is down by Sierra Vista. Vigneto is by Benson. The Upper Verde, again, a very important perennial river, also is very much threatened by groundwater pumping. And there, if Prescott and Prescott Valley have their way, they would actually pump groundwater in an area that feeds the Upper Verde and import it into their communities. We now are also hearing about some pump storage projects that would put dams in rivers, to store electricity, store water. But and that there's two proposed on the Little Colorado, one on San Francisco and one on the Salt. This is all in the context of we have very much lost a huge portion of our riparian areas, those areas along rivers and streams in our state, and our flowing rivers, and have demonstrated quite clearly that we can dry up rivers. We have yet to demonstrate that we can keep them flowing, and that's one of the things that we really are working hard on, is to keep water in some of these areas. And they're important for all kinds of ecological reasons, but clearly important for people as well.
Are we pumping out of these aquifers, and are we replenishing them at the same rate, or is this not at all the case and nobody cares? I mean, is the town of Queen Creek going to be here 200 years from now? I mean, it's almost like these are the questions I want to ask you.
Yeah. Well, I think those are really good questions, and the answer is no, we are not. There's a mandate in the Groundwater Management Act that within a number of the active management areas, they're supposed to reach safe yield by 2025. And that's clearly, that's not happening in the Phoenix active management area. The Pinal active management area has a little bit of a different mandate, but which was partly to sustain agriculture. But now that we see, well, one, the impacts of all that groundwater pumping are significant. Land subsidence, so where the land just drops down, that also helps to create these huge fissures in the earth, and so those are those are bad. They're bad for the land overall, but they're very bad even for things like agriculture and development. And once that kind of thing happens, it's not like you can fix it, right? There, like once the land subsides, it's not like if you stop pumping the groundwater that it'll just come fill back up. That's not how it works. Um, so there, Pinell County's already had some huge issues with that, as have some other places. And I think with this promoting more groundwater pumping, we might see more of that. Um,
When you're
Groundwater pumping.
when
Yeah,
you're when you're in these meetings, maybe across the table from the people even wanting to be the developers of these lands, or with these political our politicians that are representing us, are they, what happens when you talk about this stuff, when you bring this stuff up and the math don't lie kind of thing? What is the argument that, hey, we got to keep the machine going?
well, so there are a bunch of different arguments. One is that because there has been storage of Colorado River water, so they've through uh, you know well injection and through these kind of basins where the water percolates down, there has been Colorado River water stored. And so they argue that, we've got all of this water that's stored. That's one. Um, you know, they, that one of the other things that always comes up is water augmentation. There's actually an entity the governor set up that focuses on augmentation. So they're always looking for the next water source, right? So one that keeps coming up is desalination. Um, and that is like has all kinds of issues with it as well. And then there's
You
the
mean like a pipeline?
Oh, yeah. Well, it could happen in a different ways. You could desalinate some of the brackish water that is like in the West Valley of Phoenix,
Hmm.
or it could be like, a desalination plant
Mm-hmm.
in the Gulf of California, right? And a pipeline.
Yeah.
There are things like that. Or probably the more likely scenario is we would pay for a desal plant for Mexico, and then Mexico would let us keep more of their Colorado River water. So that's another
Mm.
argument so that's another thing that they're looking at. I mean, nobody has a good way to deal with the brine that comes from desalination right now. In places where they're doing it, they just dump it back into the ocean. And at some point, you have to wonder how much we can dump into the ocean without
Mm-hmm.
total collapse. And of course, we know that there are huge issues going on with the oceans right now, and that affects us too. But um, that is a whole other discussion. So they talk about that too. There's also the argument that as you develop, development uses less water than agriculture, and so the agriculture lands that are converted to development. So those are some of the
Mm.
things that they talk about.
Yeah.
And our argument is that you can't just keep doing that. I mean, that really, and you know there are all kinds of things that we need to do to keep the place where we live livable. And of course, do we really want to live in Arizona where we have dried up every blessed river and stream and spring? I don't think so.
Mm. Are there politicians right now in Arizona who are fighting for this, and what percentage of them are not wanting to just go down this never ending growth disaster that we're kind of on right now as a species.
Yes, there are some. Most of them are not, in the majority. For example, in the legislature, and then the governor is a real problem on environmental protection overall,
Hmm.
addressing, climate change, all of the things on the list on my list of things that are most important. This governor is not a champion at all, and I think has primarily, promotes business as usual. How can we keep, and that's really seems to be the goal in most of these forums, is how can we keep doing things the way we're um, doing them? How can we minimize how much we have to change? And even when they were talking about the drought contingency plan, the one of the arguments for Arizona doing a plan instead of the feds doing it for us was, well, we don't want to read in the, front of the New York Times that Arizona can't handle its water issues or that Arizona has a water problem. Because if people think Arizona has a water problem, then maybe they wouldn't want to move here.
Our number one
And so,
industry.
yeah, and so
Yeah,
that is a like, that is one of the things that keeps coming up.
yeah, yeah. Um, uh, are do you see us potentially righting the ship, or do you think that no changes will be made until it goes into DEFCON 5 and all of a sudden, we're having major water shortages and, the cat's out of the bag kind of thing?
I think that we will. I, right now, if well, on the one hand, a lot of the people we've elected to office are not doing, anything to change things. On the other hand, there are a fair number of people who are trying, and there's legislation and there's proposals and there are plans. We just need to get those adopted.
Hmm.
So I think so. I'm super, um, very enthusiastic about how much more the larger public is engaged right now on environmental protection. Like, people like, and they may not understand exactly how Arizona water laws work, or how we distinguish between ground and surface water, which is a huge problem as well. But they know that this is a dry place. They
Hmm.
know it's getting drier, and they know that we should be thinking about water and doing a better job. So I feel like there's real interest and a real push to do more.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seems like even someone brand new to Arizona starts kind of doing the math in their head and they're like, where is this water coming from? Can we just keep doing this forever? I mean, should we really have, grass lawns here in Phoenix, Arizona? Should everyone have swimming pools that they don't even use? There's all these kind of questions that you start like really looking at and posing, even just here in everyday life. If you're here in the desert, the Sonoran Desert, this is a different way of living than a lot of other parts of the world. And not to say that we can't live here. I think we have the opportunity to thrive here, actually, and actually do it in a sustainable way that generations ahead of us will be able to live here as well.